This course is about being organized with your design files on your computer. It's about how you think about file management and about how you use the files on your computer. My goal is to give you a way to think about file organization. I'll be teaching you principles that apply to many disciplines beyond design. There's a lot of methods that are useful for organizing your files. I'm going to show you one that works for me, and even if the system that you use will be different, the principles will still be the same. The goal is to name and organize your files on your computer so you can work with them quickly and efficiently. If you don't already have a system, my goal is to change how you think about being organized, plus give you some tools to start with. And the things that you're going to learn here will help you adapt to existing systems if you join another company, especially if you go work in a large studio where, as an individual, you might deal with tens of thousands of files a day, and the company as a whole may be dealing with millions of files a day. This course is really designed for people working alone or in a small group. So if you're a freelancer working by yourself or working with a small group, or you're a student trying to get your classwork organized and all the different classes that you have to deal with. And then if you're going to become a new hire to work in a company, you'll be able to better adapt to their methods. Efficiency and organization is really a critical part for the success of a company. If a company isn't organized with their files, that could slow people down. And it could be one of those things that make or break a company, regardless of their talent or the other equipment that they have. This class can apply to many different disciplines. I'm targeting this toward graphic designers, animation and visual effects, and interior designers and industrial designers and architecture. But it really can apply to so many different disciplines. Any kind of discipline where you deal with many different files on a project. For this class, I'm going to be referring to files from graphic design and visual effects, which is my background. But these principles and methods apply to many disciplines beyond graphic design and visual effects. This is for project-oriented work, where you're dealing with many different projects and projects that use hundreds, if not thousands, of files. When I was working on feature film effects, especially when I was doing particle work, I alone could generate tens of thousands of files per day. And those large studios I was working at had a pretty good system for keeping track of all those files. Here are some of the topics I'm going to be covering. File names, which includes naming conventions. File organization, which is directory structure, where you save those files. And finding files, finding the files you need, and the other files which created those files. And I'll be wrapping it up with some pro tips and things that I've learned from working in the industry. Why is this important? You'll learn to name files so that later on you'll know what it was used for. And you'll learn to name files in a way so that you'll be able to find them when you need them. Now, what can possibly go wrong? You didn't name a file so that you don't know if it's the correct one that you need to use or update. And you don't remember where you saved the correct file in the first place. So you might have 2 or 3 files that have similar names, but you don't know which is the correct one. Setting up a simple system of naming files and organizing them in a way is something that I keep meeting people who say they never thought about that before. And they seem to be unaware how this disorganization is hurting their business. That time is wasted, they look unprofessional, they're missing their deadlines, or they're not getting their homework done on time, or they're submitting the wrong file. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and how file management became important to me. Like a lot of people, I started off doing one thing and ended up going into something else. I started off as a calligrapher and a lettering artist, and that was before using computer graphics. Then I got my first job in broadcast advertising, which moved into feature films. And along the way, I did teaching in universities and I did training inside companies. And so I'm used to working people and seeing the different things that they struggle with, both technically and also as an employee. I'm showing you some of my early works back from the 1980s and the 1990s when computers were really slow and it was very expensive to work. It was really important to be well organized and efficient because the overhead was so high. These works look very simple by today's standards, but they were very time consuming and very expensive to produce. And that's how I learned to become more efficient and more careful in how I did things. This early commercial work paved the way for me to begin working on feature film work. And when I went to work in Los Angeles, working at Digital Domain, Sony Pictures Imageworks, and Rhythm and Hues, I was able to work with people that were at their top of their game. And the production part and the organization was just as important to the success of the project. So the things that I've learned that I'm teaching you come from this experience that I have working on these features and commercial work. So I've been a freelancer, I've been a small guy, I've learned to work on my own, and I've also worked with a very large team. Recently, I completed one of the largest personal projects I've ever taken on. I wrote a story about my work experience called 52 and a half feet. Besides writing the story, I created posters with descriptive information that helped describe the characters, the locations, the props, and storyboards of specific sequences. The 3D models were used to help me do the storyboarding and pre-production planning. So this project not only involves writing a story, but it involves using all the skills that I developed working in commercials and working in feature films, kind of bringing it all together into one big project. This is definitely the most complex project I've ever worked on by myself. There were hundreds of objects. Some of them I sourced and some of them I created myself, but I did all the modification, all the coloring, and combining them together with the text and the description was just a massive project. And because of the COVID-19, I created a virtual gallery instead of a physical gallery. All of this wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have a good naming convention and a really solid directory structure system, especially when I needed to go back and update or change a file. And having a good file management system enabled me to take on a project as big as this. So how do we learn these things? How do I learn these? How do you learn? A lot of it is we learn by mistakes, and it's a trial by fire. Another way is to learn from the best. I was fortunate to work with some really good people where I learned a lot of methods and techniques from them. And I also worked with some knuckleheads that weren't very well organized and really suffered because of it. Some places I worked at had really poor file management, and the companies really paid the price. And the situation with student work, I have to say, is even worse. Students really haven't learned how to organize their files, why it's important. And for the most part, their naming conventions and where they save their files is a mess. It's a disaster. It hurts them because it slows them down. They don't get their homework done as quickly as they could. You can't blame the dog for eating the homework because the dog can't even find the file. And being an organized student, it makes it easier for your teacher. It'll prepare you to excel in your career, and you'll have better use of your time working on your project, so you're wasting less time looking for the right or wrong thing, when instead you could actually be refining it and making that thing better. As an organized designer, you can avoid mistakes, which are going to reduce your income. It's going to reduce the amount of overtime that you use. It's going to prevent you from missing deadlines. And the structure is going to allow you to work on bigger projects and take on more work. Why is this important? Didn't I already ask that? Poor file management is just plain expensive. Let's say you charge $50 for a project that you estimate is going to take 100 hours. That's $5,000, not too bad. So let's say on one day you spend 2 hours looking for a file. That's $100 down the drain. And another day you spend another 2 hours looking for another file. That's another $100 down the drain. So you've already lost $200. And so now your project is actually worth less because you wasted time looking for a file. And losing time on one project affects the next project, and so your losses actually begin to multiply. I've seen some large studios waste so much time because of poor file management, and these are companies that are not around anymore. And I've said it before, poor file management will hamper progress. It can block you as a freelancer, and it can bring down a large company because of excessive costs due to time wasting. Regarding motivation, you have to desire to become organized. As a freelancer or student, nobody's going to hold your hand and make you do it. But this will change if you enter a more established firm, and if you don't learn to be organized well, it could cost you your job. The requirements for this course are pretty limited, and it's basically whatever you have now. One thing I recommend is getting a physical notebook and a pen to take notes as we go. You can check out my communication course for how I set up a notebook. You're going to encounter a lot of jargon and terms that you've never learned before. So write down these terms in your notebook and look them up later. Now the kind of files that I'm going to show you will be text files or some software files. I'm going to be using Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to be using Side Effects Houdini. And these are the files that I used to create these graphics that we're looking at right now. The text, the type was done with Illustrator, the background was done with Houdini. So this is the example that I'm going to be showing you. But really, any kind of file type will work and any program will work. The principles are all going to be the same. You don't need these programs for the course. Whatever you're using right now is going to be fine. It's learning the principles of file management and my method of organization, which is the important part. I'll be showing you some Mac, some Windows, and some Linux examples. On a Mac, we're going to be using the Finder and the Terminal. And we're going to use a text editor like TextEdit or Word, and VI, which is a command-based text editor which runs in the command shell. On Windows, we're going to be using the Windows File Explorer and a text editor like Notepad, WordPad, or Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word is not a requirement. On Linux, I'm going to show everything through the shell. For me, I'm going to be using a Macintosh to demonstrate Linux. And for all practical purposes, it's going to be exactly the same as if I was using a different Unix box. I'm going to show some very basic Unix commands and using VI as a text editor. And for the Linux examples, as you would in production, we're not going to use the file browser at all. It's all going to be done through the command shell. The example file shows the directory structure, and it has dummy files in it that show the naming convention and how things are organized in a logical way. And it's pretty much exactly the same between Windows, Mac, and Linux. The organization will be exactly the same. It'll just look a little bit different in the 3 operating systems. That's enough of an introduction. Let's get started and learn about file organization for designers.